Apparition, a ghostly image often described as a phantom, spirit, shadow or presence. Sightings of ghosts or spirits have been well documented throughout history. Stories involving apparitions of past relatives, deceased people we once knew, past occupants from times long ago appearing in dwellings. They've all been handed down over many millennia. The Australian bush is no stranger to high strangeness. Flesh and blood Yowie sightings are often difficult enough as it is, without the added element of the paranormal. And we don't want to make it any stranger than what it already is. But as I say, when you have strange attributes to a sighting, seldom reported but reported enough to make note of, it often requires further investigation. Ghostly stories of Yowies being almost transparent have been reported for the past 200 years. Spirit Yowies from the Aboriginal culture for thousands. Apparitions of Yowies seemingly floating rather than walking, shape-shifting, fading away and becoming totally invisible isn't anything new. The Empire newspaper in 1868 cites a report from Patrick Hogan, a man they say is intelligent and of good faith, who witnessed his dog slink away from an apparition of a wild man, which he later described as a gorilla, that totally disappeared in only 2 or 3 steps. He turned for his gun and when he turned back, it had vanished. In 1889, the Illustrated Sydney News tells of a 7-foot monstrous apparition covered in long black hair that appeared before the wife of Sir Henry Parkes in the backyard of their Falconbridge home, which then vanished, disappeared. In 1912, the Sydney Sun speaks of a team of timber getters in the Currickbilly Range being scared away by an apparition of a giant man-like animal that shot instant fear into their dogs. In more recent years, we can recount reports such as Terry Harding's dramatic experience where a small Yowie suddenly appeared in front of a group of workers at night while they're having dinner on a property at Mount Isa. The dog was so frightened, it suddenly dropped dead of a heart attack before the Yowie mysteriously vanished. This is a truly standout story, and if you haven't heard it before, it's audio report number 100 on our YouTube channel. Reports of Yowies gliding as they run, not seemingly solid, and even reports of cars driving through them with no physical impact. There's a high level of strangeness in some reports, and some get even stranger. Check out audio report number 171 if you haven't already. The following story many of you will already be well versed on. In 1932, a man by the name of Reg Jones caught an image of a mysterious apparition of an enormous creature while using his Box Brownie camera at Batlow in New South Wales. Batlow is on the southern side of the Brindabella Ranges. The image, many insist, resembles a Yowie. It's here I'll throw to the 1992 episode of The Extraordinary and let you be the judge.
Reg Jones has been a keen amateur photographer for 60 of his 80 or so years. These days, you can still find him and his camera wandering through the bushland near his home on the New South Wales Central Coast. But there's one photograph in his collection that really stands out, even though it was taken back in 1932 with his very first camera, a Box Brownie, that cost the princely sum of 19 and sixpence. It's a photo that still baffles him. Look closely and perhaps you'll see why. This ghostly figure in the background. The snap is one of a series Reg Jones took while he was working at an isolated loggers camp near Batlow in the Snowy Mountains during the Great Depression.
Even with the Depression days, there was a lot of young fellas that didn't want to leave the city. Not only that, they couldn't put up with the rough and the bad conditions that were up there. Because there was no electricity or no gas or no water laid on or nothing up there. It was very, very primitive. Very few people would go up there, so I think that I was one that was picked, and they said, well, right, and they more or less stood over us too, that if you don't go and you don't have a job, And in my case, I had nothing to lose and nothing much to gain. I had no family to go to. And so I thought, well, okay, the best thing to do was to take this job.
Life up there in the mountains was lonely for a city kid like Reg. But some of his mates were old hands in that part of the world, and they were only too willing to pass on their knowledge, especially at night, round the campfire. That was until one night, just a few weeks after he arrived at the Batlow camp.
I was in my hut, went to bed and fell asleep. I was sound asleep. And all of a sudden I felt something shaking my shoulder. I woke up and I thought, what's this? And I looked up and there's this great big dingo standing alongside of my bed. And I thought, gee, what's it going to do here? So I sat up, and as soon as I sat up, the dingo took off. Now, that was a story there that I couldn't understand who it was that shook my shoulder and woke me up. So I thought there might be something to these fellas' stories.
Nevertheless, Reg was still eager to explore this rugged country and capture it on film. One particular day, he and two mates set out on their most ambitious expedition.
We followed a creek down, and we got into a widening part of the creek where it widened out, and a log had fallen across there. And then behind that widened part of the creek was the Budong Falls. We could hear the water going over the cliff. And I said to my mates, I said, sit on the log over there and I'll take your photo.
The Box Brownie sure worked overtime, and by the end of the day, Reg had a full roll of happy snaps. One of those frames, though, would eventually suggest that he and his mates were not alone in the bush that afternoon.
When I got the photo developed and printed and looked at it, there's a great big monster-looking thing sitting on a log behind them. And I thought, what's this? I couldn't believe it. This is like human.
60 years later, Reg still doesn't know who or what intruded on that tranquil scene. All he can make out is a ghostly figure towering over his mates. Something that looks like a man sitting with his hands in his lap. But then, occasionally, Reg's mind wanders back to those nights by the campfire and those yarns about ghosts and demons in the Batlow bush.
It just seemed queer to me why this thing would be sitting behind my two mates. Great big monster-looking thing sitting on this log. I thought, this is, you know, out of the ordinary. Couldn't just believe it.
I think it's plainly obvious what can be seen in these images. Sunlight, shade and shadows on angles of different coloured, shaped and complex foliage can produce some amazing and convincing objects. There is high strangeness happening in our forest, that I'm certain of. We have experienced that ourselves. As for the Reg Jones photos of 1932, it's interesting. Thanks for joining us and thanks for listening.
I'll show you things you